All right, so this is Unit 2, the presentation over economics and the Human Development Index. We're going to go over a lot of key terms that you need to know for economics and, of course, the HDI, which you're going to see on every test as far as how we rank countries, as far as how they're doing economically, as well as in education and in health. So first thing we'll start off with, this is really annoying sound. Let me get it all out first. Let's see. There we go. All right, so GNP and GDP. So GNP is the gross national product. As it says there, it's the total value of all goods and services by a country over 1 year. So it's anything made by a company that is from a particular country. So to give you an example, let's use the United States. So McDonald's, Nike, Apple, Microsoft, things like that. Those are all American companies. So anything they produce or sell anywhere in the world is going to count in our GNP. So McDonald's could sell a burger in Atlanta, that's in our GNP, and then they could sell one in Japan, and that's in our GNP. So it's the total value of all goods and services produced over 1 year. And so that's only American companies, though, if you're talking about the United States. Whereas in GDP is gross domestic product. So the key there is that it's things produced within our country. So it's the total value of all goods and services within a country's borders over 1 year. Now, with GDP, it doesn't matter the company and what country they mainly do business in. So, for example, in the United States, our GDP would also include Toyota and whatever Toyota produces within our borders. And whatever they sell within our borders. So that would count in our GDP. GDP is the main indicator that we use to kind of see how our country's doing overall. And so last year, our economy, our GDP was $20.5 trillion. So that's the total value of all the goods and services we produced in the United States. That makes us the richest country or the most powerful country on earth, economically speaking. Or China, I should say, was number 2 after us at 14.2 trillion. All right, economic systems. So we're going to hit real quick the 4 major economic systems: traditional, market, command, and mixed. All right, so a traditional economy is based on agriculture. This is going to be in your least developed countries on earth. And for the most part, they don't have money, or they don't really use money when it comes to trade. They just barter the different goods that they have. And so wealth is not based on money. It's going to be based on how much land you have, or animals, or different products and stuff like that you would use in order to farm that would then bring you in wealth. So like I said, it's in your developing nations, some of your least developed countries on earth. A market economy is like the United States. So it's based on supply and demand, which means that the consumer really decides what is produced. It's based on our demand for certain products. The government in a true market system, so we're not really, technically we're a mixed economy, which I'll get into here in a minute, because in a true market economy, the government takes on a policy, it's called laissez-faire, which basically means the government does not intervene or take part in controlling the economy in any way. So laissez-faire, just think lazy. The government's lazy when it comes to doing anything to help the economy. For example, during the crash in 2008, the economic crash, GM and Ford both went bankrupt. Our government did intervene to help save those 2 companies. So if we were a true market economy using laissez-faire policy, then we would have not intervened in that case, and over 1 million people would have lost their jobs. So for the most part, market economies focus on consumer goods, and you'll see that here in the United States, Canada, Western European countries, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, all those kind of countries. And other terms you'll see for market, you also see free enterprise system or capitalism. That's all the same thing. All right, command economy. A synonym for command in this case would be communism. So a communist system of economics. So in this case, instead of the consumer controlling what is produced, it's the government. So the government plans out the entire economy for the entire country. They plan out literally everything you can imagine be produced. Usually, this is in countries that are industrializing, and so they focus mainly on industrial goods. They don't really focus on agriculture or consumer goods or anything like that. And so, for example, in a communist country, the goal is everyone to be equal, for there to be no social classes. And so when it comes to things like a couch or a bed or something like that, or your clothes, everyone's going to have the same thing because they're not focused on those things. They're focused on the bigger industrial goods. And so with these systems, like I said, the government plans out the entire economy. And so people don't have choice in this kind of system. The goal is for everyone to be equal pay, no one gets fired. stuff like that. It sounds good to people that are generally really poor and suffering. This will sound really good. For those that are wealthier, this is going to sound like a living hell. All right, mixed economies. So mixed economy is a mix of a command economy and market systems. Another way you could look at it is a mix of socialism with market system. And in most market economies that we see today are some kind of mixed economy. They have some socialism with a lot of market, or maybe they have a little bit of market with a lot of socialism. So, for example, like here in the United States, we allow the market forces to control consumer goods and things like that. But the government does intervene in certain industries. For example, in farming here in the United States, the government does provide basically an income for farmers that's guaranteed, so that if their crop fails, they're still getting paid. And also, we help with providing services through taxation, such as public school system, the roads and stuff like that. That's taxpayer money that's helping pay for the roads. And then Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all that is some form of socialism. So like I say, you'll see that in the U.S. and pretty much all your EU nations as well. Most EU nations are going to have a higher dose of socialism than we do. All right, economic resources. You need to know what natural resources are. So you should know what natural resources are, but you need to know the three different types: renewable, non-renewable, and inexhaustible. So renewable resource is something that we can take and then regrow, basically, that we can reproduce it. So, cutting down trees, well, we can grow trees back. Now, with a renewable resource, even though it is renewable, you still have to watch how much you use of it. But you can totally decimate an ecosystem if you use too much of it in a certain area. So it still takes responsibility with a renewable resource. Non-renewable resource is the most precious, and so that's something that once it's gone, it's gone. It's not coming back. Oil would be the main non-renewable resource out there. So, once that's gone, we're done with it. And as of now, we have about 45 years left until we are done with oil. Then inexhaustible resources. These are things that we can use as much as we want, and we can never, ever run out of it. And this is going to be solar power, wind power, and water power, hydropower. So those are things that we cannot run out of. So, when you're looking at a country and you look at what kind of resources you have, depending on which of these you have is going to play a key factor in how your economy develops. So non-renewable right now, really valuable, like oil, super valuable. But eventually, when you're out of oil, and if that's the only resource you have and you haven't diversified and you haven't found renewable resources within your country, or switched over to maybe inexhaustible resources like a solar panel farm or something like that, then your economy is going to go to dirt whenever oil runs out. So you need to be diversified no matter what. You can't just rely on one certain type of resource if your economy is going to thrive. All right, supply and demand. I'm assuming you've learned this in middle school. So again, the law of supply, looking at market economies, the idea is that that companies will want to provide more of a product if it's more expensive. And it's cheaper, you don't really want to provide that much of it because you won't make as much money. But demand, of course, is the opposite. The demand is much higher when a product is much cheaper. And then whenever a product becomes more expensive, the demand for that product is quite a bit lower. And so the goal in a market economy is as far as like setting prices and stuff like that, is to find equilibrium. And so find the point where supply and demand on the chart cross each other, and that's where you price products at. And so that's why sometimes you'll see price changes for items and stuff like that. It's going to change depending on the demand for that product. The higher demand, the higher the price usually, which is going to obviously lower demand. And so that's just kind of the game they play with prices in order to try to make as much money as possible. All right, another measurement is per capita GDP. So it's, on average, how much money a person makes in a particular country. It's really not totally true, but it gives you an idea at least how a country is doing. So here in the U.S., we average $59,531 this past year per person. Mexico is $8,900, Japan $33,000, so on and so forth. So it gives you a basic idea of how a country is doing, how wealthy a country is compared to others. So it's one measure that we use. And then this is different, the 4 different levels of economic employment. So you got primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. You're going to see these on almost every test as well. And again, this gives us an idea of where a country is economically speaking. So primary is getting stuff, secondary is making stuff, tertiary is doing stuff, quaternary is thinking stuff. So I'll go through all these here in a second. But basically speaking, when we look at a country and we see kind of the breakdown of their population and what percentage works in each sector, we can get an idea of where that country is. So, if most are on the primary level, that's going to be a poor country. If they're in the secondary level, they're industrializing. If they're at the tertiary level, then they were where we are right now, mainly in the service industry, which is another term for tertiary, and getting towards a post-industrial economy, which is what the United States is. We've gone through an industrial revolution. We've gotten to the point where most jobs are not in factories anymore, but have moved on past that into the service industry. And the quaternary, I'll get to that in a little bit. That's your like CEOs and things like that. Our primary level, sorry for the sound effects. Again, this is getting stuff. It's just gathering raw materials. So examples, mining, fishing, farming, stuff like that. You're not doing anything with raw material. You're not adding value in any way. You're just collecting it. So, kind of like picking cotton. Well, I can't just turn the cotton ball into a t-shirt immediately. It has to be sent to a factory to be made into a t-shirt. So it's just gathering the raw materials. Secondary employment. So this is actually adding value. So it's mainly industry. So it's where you take the cotton and now you're making a t-shirt out of it. Things like that. So now you're adding value. So these people are going to be making more money in the secondary level than those in the primary level. And then tertiary, this is service industry. So this is business people, professionals, things like that. So teachers, people in retail sales, doctors. It's also a waiter or waitress at a restaurant. So it's going to be variable levels of income that come with this. But generally speaking, the idea is that the people are providing a service. They're not actually making something. They're not making something tangible like a person in a factory. They're just providing a service. And to give you an example, here in the United States, about 75% of our workforce is in the tertiary level. All right, quaternary employment sector. These are people that run the entire system. So, for example, think Amazon. Amazon is a giant company that does business all over the world. And to run that, it's going to take a lot of research, obviously tons of management. You're going to need people that are, figuring out the logistics of all that. How do you get packages all over the world? How many vehicles do you need? How many airplanes do you need? How many people working in factories do you need? Where should you put those factories? Where would it make the most sense, logistically speaking, to get goods to people quickly and stuff like that? So the people that come up with that stuff, that are designing that very high level stuff for these giant companies, they're at the quaternary level and they're making a lot of money doing that. All right, now let's transition over to the Human Development Index. So this was created by the United Nations as a way to basically rank countries to see how they're doing overall. And so just give you an idea basically of how well people's lives are in those countries. So the indicators we look at are health, education, and living standards. So health, we're looking at life expectancy at birth. Within education, we're getting an idea of basically how long they're in school. And then living standards, and what's the gross national income per capita, and that gives us an idea of the HDI. So with this, we need to know the different economic stages of development. But first off, before that, you need to know this really important key term, which is infrastructure. So infrastructure, as it says here, is the fundamental structure and system serving a country, city, or area. So this is mainly transportation and communication systems, power plants, schools. Think about the things we need that are necessary for daily life and for the economy to function. So we need, roads and stuff like that to be able to get places and to move goods back and forth. We need ports along our coastlines because 95% of all trade is done over the ocean. We need airports to move people quickly from one place to another and goods as well. Obviously, we need power plants and things like that. We need the infrastructure for communication systems, cell phone towers, Wi-Fi systems for the internet. We need fuel, of course, for our vehicles and things of that sort. We need plumbing systems for our sewage to go and actually be treated, and then which gives us access to clean water as well to drink out of the tap. We need things like air conditioning if you're in Texas and be able to function inside a building. We need school systems to educate the masses so that we have a strong working class. We, of course, need emergency services for things when things go wrong and for them to be able to respond to that. We need hospitals. We need doctors' offices. We need All of those things, that's all key infrastructure for any economy to function. You need those things working. And so really the biggest hurdle for any country to develop is the lack of infrastructure. If you don't have that, if you don't have the basic infrastructure, your economy just can't grow. It can't do anything. And the problem is you got to invest into infrastructure, but infrastructure, of course, is expensive. So this is something that countries cannot simply do overnight. It takes time. It takes a lot of money to get to that point. All right, so let's look at different countries based on where they are in development as far as HDI goes. So your least developed countries on Earth, population pyramid is going to look pretty much like that right there, where you see a lot of children, a lot of kids being born. People are not living long at all, and the conditions, as you can see in that picture there, are absolutely horrible. So here, GDP, there's pretty much no GDP, if any, in that country. Per capita income is going to be very low on average, probably $500 a year or less. Employment sectors, if they're in anything, they're primary, but most likely these people are subsistence farmers, and they're just trying to eke by. Infrastructure, there's pretty much nothing. It's very little. So most people do not have electricity, clean water, or really any good roads or airports or anything like that. Quality of life at this point would be in crisis. You see a collapsed infrastructure and economy. Examples would be Afghanistan, Somalia, and Haiti. So Afghanistan, we've been at war there since 2001. Somalia is considered a failed state and mainly controlled by warlords. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. The government does not care for their people whatsoever, and money does not reach them, and they do not invest in infrastructure at all. All right, developing countries. So these countries are looking a little better. They're still having a lot of kids, but they're starting to live a little longer. GDP is low. Per capita income is going to be low. Employment sectors, mostly primary still. Infrastructure, generally a lack of electricity and things like that. You will see places, though, where they do have access to it, and things are okay. So it just depends kind of where you are in the country. Quality of life is generally low, low literacy rates, nutrition, medical care. So people still aren't living very long. Average age of death, countries like this most likely will be in the upper 40s to somewhere in the 50s. Examples would be Burma, Jamaica, and El Salvador. So these countries vary quite a bit. Jamaica, for example, big tourist spot. So the areas where the tourists go, infrastructure is strong, but when you get outside those areas, the infrastructure is much worse. All right, newly industrialized countries, or NICs. So again, you see the population pyramid's getting a lot better. People are living longer. They still got a good amount of kids, but it's starting to even out. But they are living much longer. And in these countries, GDP is low to medium, but it's increasing. Per capita income increasing. Employment sectors, we're seeing a shift from primary to secondary. They're mainly working in factories now, which means there's a population shift moving from the countryside to the city as well. Infrastructure is increasing all over the place. So again, you're going to see places with very, very strong infrastructure. Then you see places that are lacking quite a bit, electricity or clean water and things like that. Quality of life is low in some places, and then it's much higher in others. So you're going to see big differences throughout even just a city. Examples would be India and Mexico are great examples of a NIC. All right, and then developed countries. So that's like the United States. The population pyramid, and people are living much longer. You're not really seeing any growth overall. GDP is high, per capita income is high. Employment sectors is tertiary and some quaternary. Infrastructure is strong across the board. You may see little gaps here and there with it, but for the most part, it's good. Quality of life is really high and all that. So basically, break it down if you're looking at pictures. Picture A would be a developed country, like we are, post-industrial. Picture B would be the least developed. Picture C is a newly industrialized country. And picture D is developing. So every country has to go through this if they're going to get to where we are. You start with being least developed, then you move to developing, then you move up to a newly industrialized country. And once your industrial revolution is over and you've gone through that, you eventually make your way to a fully developed country. So every country goes through this in order to reach where we are, basically. All right, so to give you another idea of what HDI looks at. So a lot of times you'll see a chart on a test that looks similar to this. You'll see these different indicators over here, and then along the side where it says country going down, you'll normally see the names of countries. So in a more developed country, GDP is high per capita. Life expectancy is high. Infant mortality rates are low. Remember, that's children dying at childbirth. Literacy rates are high. Birth rates are low. Because remember, in rich countries, people have less kids. Developing countries, everything's increased. Well, all the good stuff is increasing. GDP per capita is increasing. Life expectancy is increasing. Infant mortality is going down. Literacy rates are increasing, and birth rates are going down as well. The least developed countries, then all the basically it's the opposite of the more developed. So GDP is low, life expectancy low, infant mortality is high, literacy rate is low, and the birth rate is high. All right, and that's it for economics. So again, definitely make sure you know HDI and how that works and the different levels of where the different countries are as far as least developed all the way up to the most developed countries. And then, of course, the different economic sectors of employment, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. Make sure you have those down and what that looks like and what kind of jobs are at those different levels. And then, of course, your traditional market, command, and mixed economies. Make sure you know how those work and function. And that's it for economics.